I've been a huge fan of like red light therapy devices for a long time, and spoke to you firsthand about how it's helped so many people, with like gut and brain health. There's no surprise that it's becoming a top wellness intervention because we're so deficient in it, and because there are so few challenges with using it versus conventional medications and drugs and all of these things like that.
Breaking the gray.
Welcome back to the Rebel Scientist podcast. I'm Chantel, here with my co-host Sarah Turner, Rebel Scientist herself. And today we're diving deep into the body's internal clock with someone who truly lives by it, Daniel White. He's a circadian rhythm expert, founder of the CRD Challenge, and educator on all things light, sleep, and daily rhythm. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Chantel. It's lovely to be here with both of you, and hello to Sarah as well.
Yes, hello again, Daniel. Lovely to see you again. We've seen each other recently, and we did a really cool, circadian day. But maybe for most people, let's start with the basics. I don't know if most people even know what circadian biology is and how you would ever live by it. So maybe you can start there by just kind of giving us a bit of a rundown.
Yeah, would it be helpful if I kind of actually start with the kind of antithesis of that and talk about how you wouldn't live by it, right? Because I think that's what most people can probably relate to. So,
Sure.
My journey into circadian biology unknowingly began when I was about 13 or 15 years old, and I was playing computer games very late into the night, staring at screens, and I was one of the first kids in my school with an iPhone, the first generation iPhone. So we're going back quite a while now, probably about 16, 17 years ago. And as a result of all the screen time and the bright light exposure and generally timing a lot of my behaviors, like, when I was eating, when I was socializing, when I was entertaining myself later and later into the night, I found that I began to really, really struggle with my sleep. And knock-on effect of not getting enough sleep at that age was putting on weight, feeling very anxious, feeling super depressed, not being able to focus or stay concentrated or alert or awake in school. Having issues with immune condition problems like allergies and eczema, which I had no idea might have been caused by some of these habits. And so after about a decade and a half of trying to unpick my health in every other way, through nutrition and exercise and all the conventional things that I was told were super important for me, and undoubtedly they are. I stumbled into this area of circadian biology, and so I often start by saying, what is the circadian rhythm? Or if you unpick the word circadian, it's Old Latin, which never really helps for the common listener. But the word circa means approximately, and DN means a day. So if we say our circadian rhythm is a rhythm that spans approximately a day, probably more colloquially known as like our 24-hour body clock or our 24-hour rhythm. Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure we'll get into this, but as the science now demonstrates, almost every single cell, system, and organ in the body is orchestrated by this timing mechanism. And it really relates back to this idea that, it's only a grain of sand on the beach of human evolution that we have lived disconnected from nature. And throughout the entirety of our evolution, there are these 24-hour periods and these cues that we call them cues, right, in the environment, light and dark, changes in temperature, changes in certain lighting conditions across seasons and things like that. And so our body and all of our cells and systems and organs were always very finely tuned to nature's clock. Let's call it that. Mm-hmm. And so nature controlled our clocks, and our clocks controlled our physiology and allowed us to thrive. Because for our ancestors, sleeping at the same time as eating and metabolizing and digesting, they weren't very, beneficial things to be for nature to be lining up for us to do at the same time. So over the time of evolution, we were designed to do certain things at certain times of the day. And unfortunately, in the modern world, especially since the invent of artificial lighting and the electrical power grid and all these sorts of things, we've moved further and further away from what is technically natural for us to what is now normal. And so circadian rhythm disruption, which is taking these clocks, these natural internal rhythms that we lived with for millennia, taking them out of sync with how they are supposed to be, it results in all sorts of chronic and acute medical problems, from infancy into childhood, adolescence, as I experienced, even into adulthood, and then older age. And it's linked with all kinds of non-communicable chronic diseases, the heart diseases, the obesities, the cancers, the diabetes, the neurodegeneration. I mean, you two know it all. Yeah, it's a really fundamental and overlooked area of our health and well-being. And what I love about it, and maybe I'll end it here for us to kind of go backwards and forth and discuss some of the aspects I mentioned, is that it's a very easy area of our health and well-being to address.
Yeah.
Unlike food and nutrition, organic food, which can sometimes be out of people's budget, or exercise and fancy diets and all the latest gadgets, which aren't either within budgets or within time constraints for families and parents and things like that. Getting ourselves back in rhythm, as we call our organisation, in rhythm, can usually be quite simple with a little know-how.
I really like what you say about that getting back in rhythm. You've touched on so many actually really key points of just like the circadian rhythm and what we're either lacking or that we've gone away from. And you mentioned a few things, like everything from like the artificial light or like having more blue light exposure to, like late night shifts. And I wondered, with the work that you've been doing, what you've seen. I know there's multiple facets of like, you mentioned the word, I think there are a few things you could do that are easier, that are easy enough to kind of adjust living in this modern day world, like with everything from the blue light exposure to late night snacking, or like all these little things that can make a difference. What would you say for someone who, obviously it's easier when someone's aware of health, but for someone who has absolutely, or health, I use the word health, biohacking, whatever the frame is you want to come from. But if someone has no idea, say they do like late night shifts and they're just kind of stuck in the modern day essence of needing to be productive or survival mode, what would you say are a few things, or like the first thing even, for them to start doing that can have a trickle effect into shifting their whole natural rhythm and biology?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's funny because if you ask me, you'd probably get a very different answer compared to maybe like a sleep scientist or someone like that. The world loves to put people into boxes, right? And it loves to categorize people, and it loves to look at averages. And one of the things I think that we've really we come up against, and I think that circadian scientists bash head with sleep scientists, because it's a lot of what we're discussing, right? Especially when we're talking about evening behaviors, is like sleep and sleep quality and ability to get to sleep. Mm-hmm. Feel well rested is this idea of like chronotypes. And so people like to slot themselves into the idea that, I'm a really late night person, and then they adopt that as an identity. And that can be like a barrier to change, right? Because you adopt this idea or this identity that you're a morning person, you're an evening person. That's just how I am. It's just, how I'm always going to be. It's, the scientists told me that it was genetic. And, I'm not saying for any, moment that behaviors late at night don't alter genes that give you certain profiles that make you seem that way, but like it's largely as a result of what we mentioned before about these lifestyle behaviors. And one of the commonalities between all of these late night or like later evening behaviors is an abundance of exposure to brighter light, and especially in the modern day, the types of light that we've invented due to like energy codes around energy efficiency are these cool white LEDs. So for somebody who doesn't know what that is or where you'd find that, it's kind of your conventional white light. It's probably in your kitchen, it's probably in your bathroom, it's coming out of your laptop, it's coming out of your phone screen, it's coming out of your computer devices, it's coming from the light in your fridge, it's coming from the street lights, it's coming from the airports, the schools, the hospitals, everywhere, because it is a very energy efficient type of light. But one of the problems and the challenges of this type of light for our circadian rhythm is that it contains a lot of what we call blue wavelengths of light. And we know in science, not to make it too technical, but there's a special cell or photoreceptor in the eye and the skin. It's called melanopsin, and it's like a blue light detector. And so throughout evolution, blue light was visible in the upper atmosphere in the sky from around the time of daybreak until shortly after sunset. And so that blue light in nature, which was essential, right? So blue light is not, the boogeyman. It's not the thing that you should avoid at all costs, but it's the mistiming and the misappropriation of that blue light. Because in nature, blue light from the sun always came with other wavelengths of light, maybe something we'll touch on afterwards. I don't want to dive too deep down that rabbit hole right now. But in the evening, unless we're intelligent about our use of screens and lights, again, it's not to say that we have to hide them away forever and we can never look at a screen, because this is another thing that a lot of the sleep scientists will say, we'll have screens 2 or 3 hours before bed. Well, we're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. In this world where screens are ubiquitous and many of us have to work late, or we want to entertain ourselves once we put the kids to bed, or we want to connect with our family across the other side of the world on the Zooms or the FaceTimes and these sorts of things. So how can we still use technology? How can we still maybe watch a little bit of television, of an evening time, or still cook or clean or brush our teeth or put our children to bed, but not be disrupting our ability to get to sleep? And so if we can filter, this is the place I always start with clients, really, and with families that we work with and things like that. It's really about dealing with Alan. Okay, who's Alan? So we used to love to use loads of little anagrams and acronyms in our work, and Alan stands for artificial light at night. So the more that we can do to reduce, so like turning off overhead lighting, using like lights below eye level, make things darker, because the brightness of the light is one thing that keeps us awake and keeps this circadian clock kind of pushing our wakefulness later and later into the night, suppressing our ability to get to sleep, because blue light and the brightness of light at night will suppress a very important hormone called melatonin, which is a master circadian hormone that produced in the way that we're discussing at nighttime from a gland called the pineal, helps to support sleep timing as well as quality of recovery and repair. And so when we reduce the volume of light, if you like, when we reduce the brightness of light at night, that's one way to help us to start to wind down more easily. Another thing we say is to filter. So on basically all of your mobile phones, your laptops, your televisions, these days, most modern devices that are coming out now have the ability to filter the amount of blue light coming from it. And maybe we could stick in the show notes. Actually, we've got a handy PDF on how to hack your smartphone and your laptop and things like that for better sleep. So you can lower the light. Step one, you can filter the light. You can also block the light. Okay, so if you're not able to use screen filters, or if you've got a television that doesn't turn that light down, or if you're out for dinner, or you're just in environments where you can't really control the light, you can wear these things called blue light blocking glasses. Now, there's a lot of confusion around what blue light blocking glasses are, what they do, which type you should buy. Essentially, and I always recommend going with a reputable and integral brand. There's some really good people out there in the space doing good products. But you want an amber or a red lens really at nighttime, because these will block 100% of the blue wavelength of light, which is what you want to do in order to maximize the production of this hormone called melatonin, which will shift your sleep. So you're falling asleep easier, waking up feeling more refreshed and things like that. So blocking the light is the third step. And then, if you really are getting into the whole circadian living, which I do recommend, it's usually a step-by-step approach, but you might then want to consider like actually changing some of the lights around your home. So that doesn't mean rewiring the whole house, but you might want a few lamps, in your children's bedrooms or in your bedroom, in your lounge, that could have like an amber or a red bulb, or maybe even like candlelight or incandescent lights, which is a very old form of light that doesn't produce the huge amount of white blue light that the energy efficient bulbs now do. So it's not the LEDs are the enemy either. It's just the type of lighting technology. It's really the chip in the LED. So how they're kind of designed and developed, which, as I mentioned, the problem now being that we rushed into this, let's save the planet, let's save energy. And we didn't realize that human biology, is really controlled by frequencies of light. And so the wrong types of light are messing with us on every level. So just to kind of run over that analogy for getting rid of Alan, I'm sorry if there's any Alans listening to this.
Poor Alan.
Get out right now, Alan. Alan, you're not allowed in my house anymore. I'm blocking you. I'm reducing you. I'm filtering you. I'm blocking you, and I'm ultimately replacing you, Alan.
Yeah. That's a brilliant overview of blue light. And I think it's really important. And it's good that you said about, energy saving, because I think people do think they're doing a good thing by putting these energy saving bulbs in. People think they're doing something for the planet. But as you said, there's a bit of a mismatch between energy saving and actually what the body wants. I would like to talk a bit about red light, because as you know, that's kind of my thing. Because you've got the blue light, which we're talking about, and we're totally overexposed to blue. But on the other side of the coin, we're totally underexposed to red, particularly the long wave, which is called near infrared because it's just above, what people can visibly see as red. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because as a species, I think probably that's the cause of a lot of chronic illness. The blue light is one thing, but actually the deficiency of near infrared is such a huge thing because it has such an effect on biology. And again, potentially easily remedied either by the OG red light device, which we all know is the sun, or with simple devices. So maybe you can just explain a little bit about that, the near infrared as well as the blue.
Yeah, I would really love to, Sarah. And I guess, I won't go too deep into like the mechanisms. We know that it's, really health enhancing from a point of view of like, skins, bones, tissue, mitochondria, our battery, right? Our exclusion zone water, increasing charge in cells. So many benefits. What I will say is that, let's keep it simple, right? And let's talk a little bit about expanding this idea of ALAN. Okay, so ALAN is like an acronym, and it's useful to think about ALAN in the nighttime. But another way that we talk to our families in particular, because the majority of the work that we do is with families, with teens, with people who are lay persons, right, who aren't, very deep down this rabbit hole, is we use another acronym. So we use the acronym LIGHT. Okay, and so what do we say to people? If you want a prescription for like daily light exposure, we say L stands for light first thing in the morning. Okay. And then we say, the I stands for include UVA, which is another type ultraviolet A light. We say the G stands for gather UVB. So we got light in the morning, include UVA, gather UVB. The H is harness evening light. And then the T is turn off ALAN. Okay. And every other step of light, apart from the turning off ALAN, the morning, the mid-morning, the UVA, the midday, the UVB, and the evening light, those all contain an abundance of infrared light, as you've discussed. So, infrared light, somewhere between, depending on the research you look at, 50 to 55% of the spectrum of light that comes from the sun is infrared. Mm-hmm. And obviously we've got like shorter and longer waves of infrared. But infrared is always available to you when you walk outside. And especially in the morning and the evening, it's really like preconditioning cells to resist or to stay resilient against the stress that's coming throughout the day, the stress of blue light from screens, the stress of all the movement and the activity, and even the stress of like the stronger forms of light that we especially get, I'm talking for the UK here, but in the summer when there's a lot, stronger UV light during the day. So, infrared light really is this like miracle light, right? It has so many healing, balancing, calming properties all the time. And as you alluded to, because as a species, we've gone from spending, let's just be real about this, 100% of our time outdoors. Okay. We used to live outdoors.
Yeah.
Live, breathe, eat, sleep, play, tell stories, stare at the beautiful sky at night, make love, all the things our species did, right? For millennia. And even when we were in the shade, when we weren't in the direct sunlight, we know now from research that green matter, so plants, bushes, trees, reflects that infrared light down onto our bodies. And so we were bathing in infrared light all day, every day, essentially, while the sun was out. And now we spend upwards of 90 to 95% of our time indoors. And so the types of light, unfortunately, now that we use indoors, as I alluded to, not only do they have this huge spike of blue light, which is, disastrous for our circadian rhythms in the early morning, especially, and especially the late night and in the evening. But because part of that energy saving code is that, the original light bulbs that were generated, whether we want to argue that it was Edison or not that created those, contained a lot of infrared light. And because those tungsten filaments in incandescent and also in halogen lights, they generated heat. And so they generated infrared energy that you couldn't see, right? And it's not the same infrared as the sun, but it was, it's far healthier as a light source than the ones we have now. And the problem being now that, energy efficiency has meant that we've moved to these cool white LEDs. So we basically get no infrared. So, not only we have these wildly disrupted circadian clocks because of the mistiming of blue and the brightness of light, but we're also missing out on this like incredibly energizing, healing, repairing and restoring infrared light. So you alluded to the red light therapy. I've been a huge fan of like red light therapy devices for a long time. I know yours is amazing. I've seen and spoken to you firsthand about how it's helped so many people, with gut and brain health. But yeah, it's there's no surprise that it's becoming, a top wellness intervention, if you want to use that word, because we're so deficient in it, and because there are so few challenges with using it versus conventional medications and drugs and all of these things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was just now thinking you're chatting about both aspects of like the blue or like the light spectrum, and wondering, I read the part about circadian stacking and wanted to kind of take it back a few, but also including the light, if you could kind of break down what you think the ideal with our current modern environment would be between like light, movement, and food timing. And even, we're talking about the red light devices, in an ideal world, say even in hospitals where you'd be wearing your blue light glasses, would nurses be having them on? Or just like, if there's any examples you have of like the modern day settings that you could shift, like these little things that make a big difference.
Yeah, I'm really, really passionate about this. So at In Rhythm, a lot of the work that we do at the moment is with families, but we're also very, very interested in like public spaces, and especially spaces like where children spend lots of time. So schools, for example, hospitals are other examples of that, offices, like hotels. There's places where we sleep and we spend like lots of our time as human beings, right? Yeah. And so there's two parts to the kind of question that you asked there. The first I'll address is, so we expand the acronym, light becomes lighter. So we add a little ER on the end. So after we've, got our light first thing in the morning, we've had our UVA, our UVB, harnessed our evening light and blocked talent. Two other things that we say are, earthing and exercise. So that's the E. So getting out and grounding, like physically touching the earth, absorbing the electrons from the earth, using the information, the electrical information that the earth gives off in the form of like the Schumann resonance to help fine tune our rhythms. There's a really interesting study. I think this will help people to contextualize it. I think it was done in the 60s or the 70s. I can't remember exactly the date. But they took people into a bunker underground and they shielded them from the Earth's electromagnetic field, which is called the Schumann resonance. And they put them in this basically like electrically insulated bunker. And these people lost like all resemblance of a circadian rhythm at all. Went from like having a 24-hour rhythm to having like 36 to like 56-hour rhythm in terms of their sleep, their hormone production, and all of these sorts of things. So a far understudied and misunderstood area, I think. Not misunderstood, but just, really underappreciated area of our circadian health is actually our physical contact with the earth. And grounding, whether that's in water, in the back garden, in the yard, in the park, in the sand, on the concrete, that's a really great way to regulate our daily cortisol rhythm, especially, and to bring more energy and vitality to the body. And the more that you can do exercise, so, walking outdoors, for example, every morning I go for a walk outdoors in the park next to where I live. I often found there at lunchtime, often found there in the evening if I have the time. So earthing and exercise is like the E, and then the R of lighter is regular meal timings, regular earlier meal timings. So a lot of people in the modern world, I think, because of a few things, culturally, it's socially appropriate that we eat later at night when the family are all home, when maybe we feed the kids first and then we get to sit down as the couple, speaking of families, or, we go to the restaurant at like 7 or 8 p.m. And depending on the time of year, that might be after the sunsets, it might be before the sunsets. And then in the morning we wake up and we've eaten so late the night before that we don't really feel very hungry. And maybe the first thing we reach for is a cup of coffee, or, we're stressing around trying to get the kids ready for school or trying to get to work on time. And I was that person, right? And I fell into a habit over decades of like skipping breakfasts. And then, I became very interested in this idea of intermittent fasting. So then it became like a permission slip to skip my breakfast because I was fasting every morning. But we know that like the circadian clocks of digestion, like liver, pancreas, stomach, gallbladder, and our metabolism in terms of like, fat burning, fat storage, leptin, ghrelin. These are all just words to a lot of people on this podcast right now. But basically to understand that like, there's a lot of things that's going on in terms of our metabolism and our digestion that's also circadian. And so if you think back to this idea of living in nature, our ancestors wouldn't have been eating after it was really dark outside. Okay, maybe if they had some leftovers or a little bit of food cooked or whatever, but they certainly weren't hunting, gathering, fishing, cooking when it was pitch black outside. And so our metabolism, and I think we're beginning to understand this more and more from research now, is really like programmed by the light in the environment. And so eating like meals earlier, I try to, in my own life, eat, like a good breakfast between sunrise and UVA rise. And we haven't really told people what that is yet, but maybe we can get onto the timing of light at some point.
Yeah.
Sort of like mid-morning, early morning to mid-morning breakfast. And then trying to have my last meal of the day really a good like 3 hours before bed. Really allows me to balance my blood sugar levels, really helps to support like, hormones and neurochemistry ahead of good quality sleep. So, a lot of the work to improve circadian rhythm can be done in lighter, having a good light diet, a good relationship with natural and artificial light over the course of each day, and then thinking a little bit about, how to bring in a few of these other kind of key and essential behaviors that our ancestors, were very consistent with. Of course, across seasons, there might have been like later meals when it was the summertime in the United Kingdom. That example I'm using again, where there was 16 or 18 hours of daylight, and then in the summer there's only 6 hours of darkness. But then in the middle of the winter, we've only got the opposite of that. 6 or 7 hours of sunlight and a lot more darkness. So there would have been seasonal variations and shifts to the timing of our activities, including when we ate. And then, Chantal, the other thing you asked me was about indoor spaces. This is really interesting. So there are all sorts of innovative types of lighting that are coming out these days. So like I often talk about this in terms of schools, right? So I talk about like the ideal circadian classroom. Like one day I hope as an organization we'll have come up with a circadian class certification that will be able to, stamp schools all around the world and say, you conform to a circadian standard for your students, because it's, there's arguably no time at life in which it's more important to have, robust and healthy circadian rhythms and light environments than in childhood and adolescence and times like this when the brain and the body are growing so rapidly. And one of the things that's coming out now, and it's not perfect at the moment, right? But there is what we call full spectrum LED lighting. So that's lights that have a little bit less kind of high strength blue light in them. They have a little bit of a fuller spectrum in terms of the other like wavelengths, the yellows, the ambers, the greens, the reds. And then there is also like new innovative types of light that actually also bring a little bit of infrared up to about 100 nanometers. I don't know if I've told you about this, Sarah, on our previous conversations. There's some people in China that are developing lighting that have like full visible wavelengths of light. And then also a little bit of infrared. And now that's nothing compared to, like an infrared therapy device. You're not going to get the same power output. It's not going to have the same therapeutic effect. But, if you consider that children or people in offices or people in hospitals are spending upwards of 8 hours a day in an indoor space, it could be very, very beneficial to have like a little trickling of infrared light. And by no means is that meant to mimic the sun in any way, but it's interesting that these new types of lighting are coming out. Whether they'll ever hit the mainstream or not is another thing, because obviously to generate more electrical output in terms of the infrared energy, you need higher amounts of electricity spent. And so in certain places in the world that will be illegal and it will not be allowed. And in other places, there may be schools and hospitals that don't want to fork out huge increases in their energy bills for having more human-centric, is what I would call it, types of lighting. So yeah, those are things to think about. But in the short term, a lot of the work that we do with families, especially, yes, blue light blocking glasses can be especially helpful. In hospitals, there are types of blue light blocking glasses that you can wear during the daytime, which help to reduce sort of like the damage caused by the daytime blue light frequencies. So it's about doing the best that you can with the tools that you're given at the time.
Even realizing now, where's ours? We're not wearing this.
Obviously, we're sitting here blasting. I mean, I am sitting by the window. I had to close it because there's a power tool, but I do usually have. I'm very lucky in this space. I have a lot of light, but I think that's a good point that you made. One, we want to move towards human-centric, and we hope as all information gets out, like your brilliant course, all the things that people are doing to educate themselves. In the meantime, we do kind of live in this system where we have gone down a more pharmaceutical, indoor life, kind of maybe a little bit off the tracks route. But I think there are so many things that you've touched on that people can do when you can't avoid it. One, do a course like yours so that you can actually understand what you're dealing with. Two, very simply, make more time to be outside. I've got a new red light device. I want to show you because it's so easy. I don't know where I've put it. Here's my new red light device.
Oh, yes.
So simple. Look at this.
How
So
does that work?
this is silk.
Right.
So if you're in a hospital or somewhere where you really can't do anything about the light, I'm going to just throw this over the light I've got here, right? So now you've instantly changed the spectrum of the light that's coming through there. I mean, actually, this was a gift from a good friend, because you could use this as a bikini because you don't block out the near infrared. So all of a sudden, instead of me, like women hardly ever expose their tops to red light, which is totally ridiculous because we need the healing light.
Yeah.
Simple hack. So there are a lot of things that you can do now. And because sometimes it feels a bit depressing, right? We're in these schools, they've got fluorescent light. We can see a big phone tower next to the school. The kids are being driven in electric cars. Sometimes it's like, oh God, humans, we're done. That's it. It's over. But actually, there are so many things that you can do. Very, very simple. Like you said, blue blocking glasses. How easy is that? If you do have to go to an airport where you're kind of being blasted, take action. And I think that just taking action and getting empowered is so helpful, because you're switching your mind state, which is something we haven't really covered, because actually your mind state, community, having friends around you that are also on the same place, that's also part of this kind of living a little bit more primal. We used to, like you say, maybe humans were sitting around a campfire, getting exposed to near infrared, telling stories. There are people who still want to do things like that. Not everybody just wants to slob out to Netflix. And if you do, maybe it is just about doing something a bit different, finding a community, finding a group, maybe even just one day a week. I think it is a bit of a depressing picture when we look at where we've got to with all the drugs and the antibiotics and the pesticides. But there are very, very simple solutions that, like you say, are not that expensive. And the light piece, really, it's not something where you need to kind of remortgage your house to do it. It's just about being educated, right? And just doing little things.
I agree wholeheartedly. And, I think after years of providing education, I was doing research in schools, running online programs, working with coaching people. I realized that number one, a lot of this information is very high level. I've tried my hardest throughout our conversations today to keep things on the ground, and not talk too much about research and mechanisms and these sorts of things. But people get very overwhelmed by this information very easily because it's a completely new paradigm shift, right?
Yep.
And so if you're the only person in your family or your community that's interested in this stuff and you have no one to talk to about it, you need to have people to talk to about it. You need to have people that you can expose yourself to who are going through the trials and the tribulations, or are coming up against the barriers and the obstacles, and are sharing their wins and their stories and the practicalities of how they apply this to their life. That's the reason essentially that we founded, me and my partner Jay, we founded In Rhythm as communities of healing. So we have a variety of different, you alluded to, programs. We have a program called Family in Rhythm, and we're in the process of releasing a program called Skin in Rhythm at the minute to help people with psoriasis and eczema and issues like that, because we both have faced challenges with those skin problems over our lifetime. But healing doesn't occur in isolation. It occurs in community. And at this point in life where this circadian health information, especially light as medicine, is so, I can't believe I'm saying it's so junior when it's not. It's the oldest medicine of time. The future of medicine is 4.7 billion years old. Is a little joke that we like to make. But being in community, and whether that's just online community, it's great to have people in person. And the reality is depending on where you live in the world, you probably have friends who love nature. You probably have friends who like to go outside, who like to go for walks, who like to spend time in the park. Your kids will enjoy going out and playing with the bugs or playing with the, the outdoor climbing frames and things like that. So you don't have to go down the circadian quantum rabbit hole with them. You don't have to try and explain to them why it's healthy to be outside. You can just enjoy being outside like our ancestors did. But for those of you who do want to learn and who really want to just get a bit of a grounded sense of what it means to implement this information in your life, because we've spoken about things like going outside in the morning, blocking light at night, and it's easy to say them, and for some people it's very easy to apply them. But then it's what if you're a family with 3 kids, one of the kids is 1 year old, one of the kids is 5 years old, the other one's 13 years old, and you come up against all these challenges of the 13-year-old's I don't want to go outside, that I just want to scroll on TikTok or do this or do that or whatever. I've got to do my homework, right? And then the young kid is I want to play on the PlayStation or whatever, and you're there well, how do I deal with this as a family? And what we've learned, I mean, I've learned more from the community that we've created than I've learned from all the science that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how you make this applicable for people's lifestyles. So it's like, can you play with your kids outdoors? Can you have your little morning picnic, your evening picnic? Can you say to your teenager, look, you can go and scroll on your phone, but you need to do it on the back porch for a few hours in the morning or a few hours in the evening. Mm-hmm. So how can you make this so that the benefits of it are just like realized without it needing to be another thing that you do in your day, right? Mm-hmm. Because what I love about I love most about working with teenagers in particular, I think that the research we did in schools is that, once you give a child a pair of blue light blocking glasses, okay, a teenager in particular, and they wear them for a week, they come back to you in the next lesson or check-in or whatever it was we were doing in the school's research projects, and they look at you and they're like, I'm a guy, and these particular students I was talking to are guys, and they're like, dude, that really works, doesn't it? Dude, yeah, dude. I'm there like, exactly. The impacts of our light environment on our health are instantaneous, really. When you think about it, only takes one morning outdoors in nature to feel brighter and happier. It only really takes one evening of being more diligent with reducing, blocking, filtering, replacing Alan to then feel better the next morning. And so if you get a string of a couple of good days in, or a week of practicing these principles, maybe apply that light or that lighter acronym, all of a sudden you're there like, wow, I cannot go back. And if you do, if you have a later night, or if you forget your blue light blockers, or if you decide, whatever, I'm going to stay up and watch Netflix all night, you've then got this, it's like you've awoken to the light, excuse the pun, you kind of can't go back, right? You've kind of become a bit enlightened with it. So It's not so much like nutrition or supplementation or exercise, where you really need a string of a couple of good weeks to start to feel your energy levels really, really pick up. I mean, obviously, if you don't exercise, you're going to feel, or move, you're going to feel very tired one day. If your diet's awful one day, you're going to immediately feel worse. But generally speaking, when people start to take supplements, when you start to make dietary changes, it's a little bit, the lag time to see the improvement is a little bit longer than if you make changes to your light environment. So, to kind of come back, because I went, all the way around UK, get back to Ireland there with my statement. What I would say is, surround yourself with a community, and if that means just an online community to begin with, maybe there's Q&As, there's drop-ins, there's people you can come and learn from, yourself, myself. Do that, because very soon, the camaraderie and the support and the accountability will mean that you or your family's life has completely transformed.
I really love how you share, or the one thing that comes out that I often think about when, especially with the work that you do with families, is this thing of family culture and the quirky analogies, because I think my favorite thing to sometimes just see is when kids are young, because I was lucky enough for the first 5 years of my life to be on a farm. And I often think about that, because I notice the way I feel or the way I exist in the world when I'm doing certain things almost back to that time. And how there's this natural curiosity that kids have to just be in nature. And how I feel the rhythm of you get tired, you go eat, and you come back. And it's this almost this confidence I think it also installs in kids to have, and how a bit disconnected the modern day world is. And just this thing of culture that you're mentioning now, and also depending on we're all, okay, you guys are from the same continent, but often with traveling, it's interesting witnessing which cultures embody that more. Currently I'm in Switzerland, and everyone's very outdoorsy to a degree. So you notice people doing certain things just more on autopilot. So I think it's amazing that you're doing the work to also bring it online to people to know that you can do it sort of wherever you are in the world. Because obviously cities like London or New York, they don't have a natural, they have parks and people go to the parks, but there's a lot more resistance sort of to that natural rhythm. And I guess my luring to another question was going to be, you mentioned this thing about research. So I think there's a lot of people that do listen to this podcast that would love to know about if there's anything specifically recently that you've seen research-wise that you would be willing to share, or that you've just found that has kind of been debunked about what people assume regarding circadian rhythm, or
Yes, there's a couple of things I'd like to share. So shamelessly, I think I'd like to share a little bit about the research project that we conducted in schools, because that was quite a massive one. But I'll maybe mention a couple of little points first. So I think two research studies that really, really stand out to me that I've read over the last year or two. There was one where, and maybe we can share this in the show notes, and I'm not going to butcher the exact specifics of the methodology, but essentially they took a group of young children, like preschool children. Maybe there was somewhere between like 20 and 30 of these children. And they put them into like 8 different groups. And they exposed these children to different intensities or brightness of light for an hour before bedtime. And what they had done prior to that experimental condition is that they got them into a really like consistent sleep routine for 7 days prior. They'd been measuring like their melatonin levels, and they'd seen that, these children wind down. They have like, a low light environment in the evening. They get to sleep. They produce this amount of melatonin. So they had a bit of a baseline. And then they split them up into these like 8 different groups where there's increasingly higher and brighter levels of light. And they expose them to an hour of white light at different brightnesses before bedtime. And I think they found that on average, melatonin levels were suppressed by, I think, between 69 and like 98% in these preschool kids, right? So just showing like how sensitive younger children are in particular. Like we know that the iris hasn't fully developed. So like I believe in Sarah will probably know a bit more about this than me, but like that means that more light enters into the eye. So the pupils dilate wider and like, more light information is captured. So we think about children's behavior, especially younger children, like a lot of younger children these days, like gaining weight, having mood related issues and things like that. Light is a fundamental part of regulating their rhythms and their metabolism and their mood and their behavior and their neurochemistry. So that's a really huge one. And then another one I love, and this is an Andrew Huberman share, is this idea of like the late chronotype, right? The badge of honor. I'm a night owl, and I see it everywhere and I understand it. Okay. Like I've got friends who live in this community building where I live in London, and, I'm the person that goes to bed the earliest. I've just trained myself that way, but I wasn't that way, right? I used to stay up late and video game and read books and scroll on all the social medias and have late night conversations and all of those things. And I loved it. And I was like, I am the nighttime person. I come alive in the nighttime. And we developed this as a bit of like an identity. And I think it's probably true that over long periods of time, like we become more efficient at nighttime, but that's not because our biology is meant to be that way necessarily. Now, I'm not saying that like we should be shaming ourselves or anything of the sort for like staying awake later or having this predisposition or, propensity, I should say, to like prefer to do things at night. But the idea that like all of these chronotypes, so early morning or late night, they're all equal in terms of health and well-being outcomes is untrue. And so what they've been showing is that for late night people, when they change their nighttime light environment, symptoms of like depression and mental health problems decrease. Okay, so there seems to be a slightly higher incidence of like mental health problems in these night owls, right? And so like Huberman was sharing, and I don't have the reference for this one, but maybe we can find it, that basically like if you do work to make your chronotype earlier, or to like what we call in science to like phase advance your circadian clock, then like mental health outcomes and energy levels and things like that improve. So, even if you think that you're a hardcore night owl, there is probably something you can do to shift your body clock a little bit. And it's, I think it's really interesting because like, another thing, and we haven't even gotten into this, I mean, we could sit here and talk for hours about like sleep and, the psychology of sleep. And it's like, the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves. And, I used to work pretty much as a sleep coach for a few years. And, before getting deeper and deeper into like educating the world at large on circadian stuff. And I always used to know if I could help somebody pretty quickly after our first meeting by their attitude towards their ability to change. So if they said to me, I've been doing it this way for 2 decades, there's probably nothing you can teach me about sleep. I'm just the sort of person who gets 6 hours every night. It usually tells me that I understand why you think that, because you've been doing it that way for a really long time. But like young children, especially, very malleable, right? As we become adults, older and older, it becomes a bit harder to change, but with the right mindset, we certainly can. And then just to speak to the schools research project that we did. So I did, if I'm being honest. I registered a charity about 4 or 5 years ago because I realized that like I wanted part of my life's mission to be to like address the problems that I experienced in my childhood. Because when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, I was the only kid I knew who was depressed, anxious, suicidal, overweight, obese because of screens, right? I was the only child I know. And now, I mean, it's astronomical, the level of like physical and mental ailment as a result of like disrupted circadian rhythms in younger children. And so I kind of realized that I wanted to pay it forward. And I took a couple of years to write a proposal for a research project that eventually got granted ethical approval in my home island of Guernsey and the Channel Islands. And I basically went into schools and I did a bit of a split test. And so I managed to get sponsorship from a company called Viva Rays. So big shout out to Viva Rays and big shout out to Rudy at Viva Rays.
I've got them here.
I'm wearing a Viva Rays glasses right now. I think we've probably all got a pair of these. Yeah, a big shout out to Viva Rays, the Rolls Royce of blue light blocking glasses, in my opinion. You'll only probably understand that reference if you're British. But essentially, we got pairs. There we go. There they are.
That's better.
We got pairs of nighttime blue light blocking glasses, and what we did was we took about 500 kids from seven secondary schools between the age of about 13 and 18, and I split them up into one of 4 groups. And in the first group, so I should say, for every student, they completed a questionnaire at the beginning of the study that was assessing like indices of sleep quality, mood, and alertness. So looking at sleep quality, sleep consistency, stress and anxiety before bedtime, and then like next day levels of alertness and mood, and how that was impacting their lives and school kind of time in particular. And in the first group, we just gave them blue light blocking glasses. And we said to them, wear these amber lens blue light blocking glasses. They block all the blue light, wear them for 3 or 4 hours before bed. In the second group, we gave them blue light blocking glasses, but I also went in and gave 2 educational like lectures or lessons for the kids. And so I taught them a bit about blue light, about avoiding screens. I taught them about, some relaxation techniques in the evening. I taught them about the things we spoke about today, right? The whole lighter thing, really, getting lots of sunlight during the daytime, eating your meals earlier, avoiding caffeine, in the afternoon, because a lot of kids are coming home and drinking their Prime or their Red Bulls or whatever after school and getting out of their mind on caffeine. So I'd like to think that that was quite helpful. And then in the third group, we just provided the education lesson. So we taught them about blue light, but we didn't give them any blue light blocking glasses. And then in the fourth group, we put them on a waiting list. So that was like our control group. And that we remeasured them 2 weeks in and then 4 weeks in. So we repeated the same questionnaire. And so what we saw was like a phenomenal improvement in sleep quality, sleep consistency, reductions in stress and anxiety in the evening, improvements in next day alertness. And we saw the biggest changes, as you might expect, in the groups that had the education and the glasses. But actually, the glasses alone group were very close to the same level of improvement. So we kind of measured it on like a Likert scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is like very poor sleep, 5 is great. And everybody in the group with the education and the glasses, they kind of jumped up like 1 full score from like an average of a 3 to like a 4, for example. So it was a big statistically significant improvement when we ran the stats on it. There was also improvements from the education only group, but nowhere near as much as the blue light blocking glasses and the combined group. And then the control group actually got a little bit worse over time. So that was quite interesting. So yeah, we did that research project, and then we didn't publish it academically just because of the amount of hoops that we would have needed to jump through and various different things. But we have a white paper published on that, which is, it's essentially a scientific article. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to put that in the show notes as well. Sure. So part of our mission really at In Rhythm is like working with families, especially, families who have children or who they themselves as parents are experiencing issues with like mood, anxiety, depression, and things like I experienced in my youth, essentially, which is pretty much most families these days, sadly. Yeah. But also like schools and places where families and children congregate. So we're looking now at doing research with schools all over the world. So if anybody's listening to this and you're involved in any school networks, or perhaps you're a very passionate parent, not only can you come and learn from us at In Rhythm, but you can also, perhaps put us in contact with your school and we can come and deliver some wonderful education.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think we're kind of coming to the end. So maybe you could just tell us exactly where people can find you. I know Chantel may have couple of her quick fire rounds to go, but maybe just you could, I'm sure people are going to want to know where they can find you and find the resources.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much to both of you. It's been really, really enjoyable to come and chat to your audience today. So you find us at our website is In Rhythm, so inrhythm.earth. And you'll also find us on social media, which is Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, on X as well, at inrhythm.earth. You'll find me on LinkedIn at Daniel White. So those are the places to come and find us. You'll be able to learn on our website and on our social media about any free educational opportunities, any of our sort of closed private communities where we have our education program, Life in Rhythm. And we have, as I mentioned, like a family version of that, and then also a version of that we're currently in the process of launching for people to support improvements in like skin health and things like that.
Great. Amazing. Thank you so much. I realize you actually have answered quite a few. You've answered basically all of the fire round questions I was going to ask. But I have one last question for you that I would love for you to leave the listeners with. If you could put one sentence on a billboard in every city, what would it say about circadian health?
Oh, it would probably be that it wouldn't necessarily.
It could be anything. It doesn't have to be about
people's interest, right?
Yeah.
So it would be something along the lines of the light that enters your eye is more important than the food that enters your body.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Or that light is more important than food.
That's a good one.
So it's one, and the reason I say that is because it's, and I give credit to that idea to a guy called Nathan Walls. He was like somebody that taught me a lot about circadian biology about a decade ago, and it really piqued my interest because I was such a foodie, and I was so into like calories and nutrients and eating color and like nose to tail and like thinking that I was really taking care of my health through my diet. And then I had no idea that like actually the light that entered my eye was as important, at least, as the food that I was eating.
Yeah, that's
amazing.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Daniel. We look forward to following all of your courses and meeting you in person again and all the things.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Breaking the gray.